The widowed farmer found her barefoot behind the church at midnight. The shovel hit clay about 2 feet down, and I stopped, not because I was tired, just because I couldn't remember why I'd started digging. That's the kind of thing that happens when you've been alone too long. You start a thing, a trench for a new fence post, a hole for a dead dog, you don't know what, and somewhere in the middle of it, the reason falls out of your head like a coin through a rotted pocket, and you're just a man standing in a hole in the dark. The lantern I'd set on the near fence post was guttering. June bugs going at it like they had a grudge. The field behind the house smelled like turned earth and something faintly sweet I couldn't name. I stood there in that hole and I thought, I should go inside. I didn't go inside. I climbed out instead and walked. I don't know what I was looking for. The farm was quiet the way only a farm can be quiet when it used to be full of a woman's noise and isn't anymore. Elsa had been gone 14 months. 14 months, and I still reach for her coffee cup in the morning. I still talk to her if I'm being plain about it. Just under my breath, walking the rows or mending fence. Told her things. Told her the south field was coming in decent. Told her the Harmon boy had finally gotten himself married and his mother looked about 50 pounds lighter for relief. Small things. The kind of things she'd have wanted to know. I walked the length of the cornfield and then past the old smokehouse and then past the edge of our land where Wilton Greaves' property started, and I kept walking because the night was warm and had nowhere to put me. I ended up on the back road that ran into Calvert, just the dirt track between my place and town, and then I was in town, or the edge of it, walking without making any particular choice to walk. The church was dark. Of course it was dark, it was past midnight, maybe near 1. Reverend Cal didn't keep late hours. He was a morning man, up at 4, in bed by 9, regular as a railroad timetable. The church sat quiet with the big cottonwood beside it, the leaves moving a little silver pale in whatever moon there was. I almost didn't see her. She was sitting on the ground against the back wall in the shadow where the cottonwood root humped up through the dirt. Bare feet flat on the ground in front of her, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around them. Her shoes were beside her, not beside her actually. One was upright in the dirt about 2 feet away, like it had been thrown, and the other one was on its side near the corner of the building. She wasn't crying. She was just sitting very still the way a person sits when they've run out of things to do next. I stopped. I hadn't made much noise coming around the building, but she heard me. Looked up. She didn't startle the way some women would. She looked at me level, and I could see enough of her face to know she was measuring me, not afraid exactly, just careful. Her hair had come halfway undone. She was maybe mid-30s. She had a jaw that said she'd made decisions and held to them. I said, "You all right?" She thought about that for a moment, like it was a question that required honest consideration. "I've been better," she said. "Fair enough." I didn't push it. I sat down a ways off with the cottonwood root between us, and I put my back against the church wall the same as she had hers. The ground was cool. I could feel the grit of it through my trousers. Neither of us said anything for a spell. After a while she said, "You live here?" "Quarter-mile back that way, farm." "You always walk around town in the middle of the night?" "Not usually," I said. "Couldn't sleep." She made a small sound, not quite a laugh, but something that acknowledged the truth of that kind of thing. "Me either," she said. I didn't ask her anything else. That's important, I think, looking back, that I didn't. Because I wanted to. I had half a dozen questions already forming up. Who she was, why she was here, where she'd come from, what the shoes were about. But I'd been married 22 years to a woman who taught me, patient as a schoolmarm, that some things open up on their own schedule and not a minute sooner. So I sat and I watched the cottonwood move, and I let the quiet do what it does. What it did eventually was this, she said. My husband left me in Casper, said he was going for more money and would send word. That was 8 months ago. I nodded. I've been following work west, cooking, washing. I got a week's work from a family near Odell, then nothing. I walked into Calvert today thinking maybe there'd be something. There wasn't. She paused. I spent my last 30 cents on a piece of bread. The woman at the bakery felt sorry for me, I think, and gave me a second piece. I ate half of it and put the other half in my pocket. I didn't say I'm sorry. It's what you're supposed to say. But it had started to feel hollow to me, all the right things you're supposed to say, and she didn't look like a woman who wanted the right things said to her. So I just sat there. She said, I got a blister from my left shoe, so I took them both off. I thought I'd rest here a minute and then figure out what to do next. She looked at her feet. I've been resting here about 4 hours. There was something in how she said that, the plainness of it, that hit me somewhere between my ribs. Not pity, something more like recognition. The way you recognize the particular sound of a well that's run dry. I said, I've got a spare room, clean sheets. You could sleep and eat breakfast and figure out what to do next in the morning when you've got something in you. She looked at me again with that measuring look. I started, and then I didn't finish it, because the end of that sentence was something like I'm not that kind of man, and it seemed to me that a man who's actually decent doesn't generally have to say so. He just is. She seemed to understand that because she nodded. All right, she said, thank you. She put her shoes back on, which took a minute because her feet were sore and the left one was bad, and we walked back to the farm. I didn't offer my arm or make anything of it. We just walked. She limped a little and didn't say anything about it. Her name was Dora Flinch. She told me that on the walk back, and I told her mine, Cal Burden, and she said it back once to herself, like she was making sure she had it. I showed her the spare room, which had been my daughter's room before Helen married the alderman boy and went north to Montana. There was a quilt on the bed, blue and white, that Elsa had made. I didn't say that. I brought Dora a cloth and a basin of water and a bar of soap, and I said there was a privy out back and breakfast would be at 6 if she wanted it, and she said she wanted it, and that was that. I went to my room and I lay there in the dark with my arm across my eyes, and I thought, that was a strange night, Cal. Yes, it was. And I slept, finally, for the first time in what felt like weeks, all the way through till 5. She was up before me. I smelled coffee and came into the kitchen, and she was at the stove, her back to me, her hair braided neat. She had a clean blouse on, a different one, and her shoes. She had found the flour and the lard, and there was a pan of biscuits already going. She heard me and half turned. I hope you don't mind, she said. I sat down at the table, and I didn't say a word. She set a cup of coffee in front of me, and then she sat across the table, and she had one for herself, and she looked at me with that level look and said, You going to tell me why you were wandering around at midnight? I told you, couldn't sleep. But she drank her coffee. You always farm alone. Used to be my wife. She died last year. Dora didn't say I'm sorry either. She just nodded the same way I had. And I thought, all right, this one's been through enough to know what that nod means and when to use it. The biscuits came out of the oven, and she split one open and put butter on it and slid it across to me, and I ate it without thinking, which is the thing I'm still surprised by when I think about that morning. I hadn't eaten anything I didn't have to force myself through since Elsa died. The biscuit was good, hot and a little salty, and the butter was going soft. I ate it like a man who was hungry, and then I ate another one. I didn't ask her to stay on. I want to be clear about that. I'm not a man who offers things and then takes them back, and I was not going to offer a woman a room and then figure I'd gotten something out of it. I'd given her a bed for the night, same as I'd do for a hurt dog or a kicked horse, because you do. That's what you do. But after breakfast she said, What needs doing today? I looked at her. On the farm, she said, What's the work? I said, I've got a fence line that needs walking and some post rot to deal with. Took a calf last week from the Tillman place, borrowed it to see if the grass was coming up strong enough, and I owe it back. Barn needs a good sweep. She said, I can sweep a barn. You don't have to do that. I know I don't, she said. What time do you want to eat at noon? I just looked at her again. She got up and started washing the dishes. That was the second day. I want to tell this plain. I am not going to dress it up into something it wasn't, because it wasn't that. Not at the start. For the first 3 weeks it was just, she was there and she was useful, and the house didn't feel like a box I was going to get buried in. She cooked 2 meals a day and she kept the kitchen clean and she helped in the garden, which she seemed to know about because she'd grown up in Missouri on a farm. She was quick and efficient and didn't need to be told things twice. She didn't talk more than was necessary. She wasn't performing gratitude at me. She just worked. But there were small things. She noticed I wasn't eating right. Not all at once, just over time. She started making sure there was something waiting for me when I came in at odd hours. Left a covered plate on the warming rack once when I was in the field past 7. Didn't say anything about it. Just left it there. I stood at the stove and ate it in the dark with the lamp unlit because I didn't think to light it, and it was good. She found Elsa's rocker on the porch and she just left it there. She used the old ladder-back chair instead when she sat outside in the evenings. I don't know if she knew what she was doing or not. I didn't ask, but I appreciated it. One evening in the 3rd week I came in and she was at the table with the farm ledger open in front of her, and I stopped short because nobody touched those books but me. She looked up and said, "I found this on the shelf." I wasn't prying, but I did some numbers. You've got about 18 months of margin if everything holds, but if you lose another calf to bad grazing this season, it'll be tight. I said, "I know. You've got 60 acres on the east side that aren't planted. I know that too. Grain would carry you through, if you wanted. I'm not telling you your business." She closed the book and put it back on the shelf and went back to whatever she was doing. That's the thing about her. She'd say the thing once and then let it go. She never pushed. But she'd already done the numbers and seen the shape of things, and she handed that to me like, "Here. In case it's useful, take it or leave it." I planted the East 60 in grain. She came out to help with the planting. I hadn't asked. She showed up the second morning early with her hair tied back under a kerchief, and she picked up a seed bag and she worked. She wasn't fast, not at first, but she had the right way of holding herself for field work, low and steady, not wasting motion. By the 3rd day she was keeping pace with me, and by the end of the week I'd have bet she could outlast most of the men in Calvert County. Evenings she'd pull off her shoes at the door, and I'd see the calluses on her hands and the dirt in the creases of her wrists, and I'd feel something I didn't have a name for yet. Not the softness a man feels toward a woman who needs protecting. Something different. The way you feel toward someone who is doing hard work alongside you and not complaining and not asking to be thanked. I'd been alone long enough that I'd started to believe I was supposed to be alone. That Elsa had been the one good thing, and she was gone, and the rest of my life was just going to be me keeping the farm going until I stopped keeping it going. That's a thing that gets into you when you're 61 years old and your wife is dead, and you're wandering around Calvert at 1 in the morning not knowing why you dug a hole. Dora didn't argue with that belief directly. She just kept showing up and working alongside me and putting food in front of me, and eventually the belief started getting crowded out by something else. Something that didn't have a name either. 4 weeks in, she got a letter. It came into Calvert while I was in town picking up a few things, and the postmaster handed it to me because he'd seen Dora around the farm and knew she was staying on. I looked at it, but I didn't recognize the hand, and I brought it back and set it on the table. She opened it that evening after supper. I was on the porch. She was quiet in the kitchen for a while, and then she came out and stood near the porch rail with the letter in her hand, and she said, without looking at me, "My husband's dead. They found him in a claim camp east of Denver. Somebody shot him over a card game." I didn't say anything. She stood there with the letter. The night was coming in from the west, blue-gray over the fields. A nighthawk was working the edge of the cornfield. "He wasn't a good man," she said. "I want to be honest about that. I wasn't waiting for him to come back. I was just waiting for the legal part of it to settle. I understand, I said. She folded the letter and put it in her pocket, and she sat down in the ladder-back chair, and she looked out at the fields. The nighthawk made a sound. After a while she said, "Is the spring wheat going to hold?" "If we don't get a dry stretch of more than 2 weeks," I said. She nodded. We sat out there until the dark came all the way in, not talking, and then she said good night and went inside, and I sat a while longer on my own. I need to tell you about the middle of July. We'd had a good stretch. The grain was coming up well, the weather had held, the calf situation had resolved itself in my favor. But I got a letter from the Calvert First Savings that the note on the farm was being called in earlier than I'd planned for, and the amount they wanted by October 1st was more than I had sitting anywhere. And I sat in the kitchen that evening with the letter on the table, and I looked at it, and something in me just gave. It wasn't the money exactly. A man can figure out money, usually, if he's got time and his head on straight. But I'd been figuring things out alone for 14 months, and I was just tired. Tired in the particular way that has nothing to do with the body. Tired of carrying the whole shape of the farm in my head by myself, of being the only one who knew where everything stood and what needed to happen next and whether we'd make it to spring. Elsa had known. She'd known all of it, kept the books alongside me, knew the land, knew the neighbors, knew which deals were worth making and which men to trust and which ones to watch. I was just a man sitting at his kitchen table, looking at a piece of paper that told him the thing he'd spent his life building was going to slip out of his hands. And the truth of it was, I didn't know if I had the fight left to stop it. Dora came in from checking on the garden. She saw the letter. She didn't ask. She just looked at my face and picked the letter up and read it, and she put it down again. She sat across from me. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Let me see the ledger." "Dora, let me see it." I got it down and she opened it and she went through it line by line. I watched her hands moving on the pages. She had short fingers, strong, the nails cut plain. There was a callus on the inside of her right forefinger from a pen or a pencil. She'd done figures before. The lamp was between us, and the light was warm on her face. She looked up. "You've got the grain sale coming in September. If prices hold, and they should, it's a short year for the whole county. You're going to come within $400 of what they want. $400 is still $400. I know." She turned the ledger slightly. "You've got the 2 mares you haven't been using since the tractor work went to Mercer. Jeb Tillman's been asking about horse stock. 300, maybe 350 for both. That still leaves 50. "I have $60, she said. I looked at her. "I've been putting aside what you've been paying me." She said it matter-of-factly, like it was a simple arithmetic statement. "I want to put it in, if you'll let me." "I'm not going to take your money." "You're not taking it," she said. "I'm offering it." "Dora." "Cal," she said it the same way I'd said her name, level, not budging. "Listen to me. You've given me a place to sleep and food and work, and you haven't asked for a single thing I didn't want to give. Now I'm asking to give you this. It's $60. You can pay me back in the spring when you sell again if that's what you need to do to accept it. But let me do this." I looked at the ledger. I looked at her. The truth was, I didn't have another way. The truth was I'd been sitting at that table thinking about walking away from the farm, and I'm not sure what I thought I'd do after that. And I didn't let myself think about it too clearly because where that thought went wasn't any good. And now she was sitting across from me with the lamp between us saying, "Here, let me help. Let me do this one thing." I said, "I'll pay you back in the spring." She said, "I know you will." She closed the ledger and she got up and she heated some coffee and she brought us both a cup, and we sat at the table with the letter between us and we worked out the rest of the numbers. She knew how to do it. She had it organized in her head the way a woman does who's been keeping accounts her whole life, adding and subtracting and planning ahead without making a production of it, just doing what needs doing. When we had it figured, I said, "Thank you." She nodded. I put my hand over hers on the table. I didn't plan it, didn't think about it. It just happened, the way your hand finds something solid in the dark. She looked down at where our hands were. Then she turned her hand over under mine and she held it. We sat like that for a minute. Then she let go and I let go and she went to bed and I sat up a while longer, just with the lamp, and I felt something come back into me that I'd been missing for 14 months. Some steady thing. I don't have a better word for it than that. The note got paid. The grain came in at better than expected. The mares went to Jeb Tillman for $320. I paid the bank in September, drove in myself and put the draft on the postmaster's counter and watched the numbers move in the right direction, and I drove back feeling lighter than I had in 2 years. Dora had supper on when I got home. Pork and greens and cornbread, which she'd learned was the thing I liked in the evening after a long town day. I sat down and she poured me coffee and I said, "It's done, paid clean." She said, "Good," and she sat down and we ate. I tell you this not because the meal was anything unusual. It was ordinary. That's the whole point. The meal was ordinary and the kitchen was ordinary, and she was across the table from me, the way she'd been across that table for 2 months, plain and hardworking and steady. And it was the most alive I'd felt since Elsa was here, and I nearly couldn't stand it for a second. How simple it was. How available it had been all this time, just this. A person across the table who gives a damn whether you eat. In October, the minister came by. Reverend Cal. He was a decent man, decent enough, but he'd been in Calvert long enough to know everyone's business, and he felt, I think, a kind of duty about it. He came by on a Tuesday morning when Dora was in the garden, and I was mending a harness in the barn, and he sat on the fence rail and talked around the edges of what he wanted to say for about 5 minutes before he got to it. "People are talking, Cal," he said. I kept working the leather. People always are. "She's been here, what, 3 months now?" "About that." He picked at the fence rail. "I know you're a good man. I know what Elsa was to you, but people see what they see, and what they see is a woman living in your house." I looked up at him. "She's in the spare room. She works the farm. She's kept this place solvent when I wasn't managing it myself." "You want to tell me what's wrong with that?" "I'm not saying. Because if you came out here to tell me something's wrong with a woman working and sleeping under a roof that belongs to her and nobody else's business, you can get off my fence." Cal was quiet for a moment. Then he said, more gently, "I came out here to say that if you two were to make it formal, well, that would be an end to the talk." I looked at him a long time. He said, "I'm not telling you what to do, just I wanted you to know the door was open, if that's the direction you were thinking." He left after that. I stayed in the barn a while and I thought about what he'd said. Not the gossip part, the other part. The door was open. I hadn't let myself think about it directly. I'd circled it for months, the hand on the table, the ledger in the lamplight, the morning she'd shown up in the field with her kerchief on, and a seed bag over her shoulder like she'd always been there. I'd circled it and not looked at it straight on, because looking at it straight on meant acknowledging that it mattered to me, that she mattered to me. And I hadn't been sure I was allowed to have that, 14 months after Elsa. I walked to the garden. Dora was on her knees between the rows, pulling the last of the summer squash that had been lagging. She heard me coming and she looked up. I said Cal was here. I saw him. She went back to the squash. He said people are talking. Of course they are. He also said I stopped. She waited. I said he said that if we were to make it formal, that would settle it. She pulled another squash and set it in the basket. Her hands were dirty. There was a streak of soil on her jaw from when she'd pushed her hair back. She stayed on her knees in the dirt, and she looked up at me, and it was the same measuring look from the first night, the one I'd seen in the shadows behind the church at midnight. level and careful and giving nothing away it hadn't decided to give. Then she said, "Is that something you want?" I crouched down so I was at her level, there in the garden, the two of us in the dirt with the squash basket between us and the October sky going gray over the fields. I said, "I'm 61 years old, Dora. I've got a mortgaged farm and bad knees, and I talk to my dead wife sometimes, because it's the only way I can get through the morning." She didn't flinch. "And I think you're the steadiest person I've ever worked alongside. I think you saved this farm, and I think you probably saved me along with it. And I think I'd like you to stay, not in the spare room, but here, if that's what you want." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she put her hand on the side of my face, not soft, not sentimental, just flat on my jaw, her palm against the stubble, and she looked at me the way you look at something you've decided to keep. "It's what I want," she said. She went back to the squash. I crouched there in the garden for another moment, feeling the place where her hand had been. The sky was going gray, and the fields were quiet, and the basket was full of squash, and the farm was still standing, and so was I. We married in November. A small thing, Reverend Cal, a few neighbors. Helen came down from Montana with the alderman boy for 2 days. It was cold, and the cottonwood beside the church was bare, and Dora wore a dark blue dress she'd made herself. She carried no flowers. When Cal got to the part where he asked if we'd take each other, she looked at me the same way she'd looked at me in the garden, steady and plain and decided, and said I will like she meant it to stay said. Afterward, back at the farm, Helen hugged me in the kitchen and she was crying, and I patted her on the back and told her it was all right, and she said, "Pa, she's real good," and I said, "I know." That night, after the alderman boy and Helen had gone to bed in the spare room, Dora and I sat at the kitchen table with some whiskey I'd been keeping for a reason I hadn't known yet, and we sat there in the quiet of the farm, and she poured 2 fingers for each of us, and we just sat. She said, "You found me in a good spot." I said, "Behind a church at midnight with no shoes on." She almost smiled. "A good spot," she said, "for finding something." I drank my whiskey. "I wasn't going to give up," she said. "I want you to know that I had more in me. I was just resting." "I know," I said. "But I'm glad you walked by." I looked at her across the table, this woman who had walked into my life barefoot and practical and full of grit and quiet steadiness, who had done my numbers and planted my grain and put her $60 on the table without fanfare and her hand on my face in the dirt of the garden. And I said the only true thing I had left to say. "So am I," said, "so am I." The lamp was between us and the farm was quiet, and there was snow coming maybe, out of the northwest. I could smell it in the kitchen the way you can when you've farmed long enough to know what the air is telling you. Snow coming and the winter stores in, and the note paid, and a woman across the table who looked at me like I was something worth staying for. That's it, that's the whole of it. I've got nothing to add to that.